Space is quite vast.
We're receiving a signal.
On audio.
Oh my God, it's full of stars.
Doc, you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
Prepare ship for ludicrous speed.
Into the limitless boundaries of space.
It's in the name of science.
Absolutely marvelous.
The latest result in machine intelligence.
I'll be back. God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs. I am your father. The podcast from Planet
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast from Planet X. My name is Ben, and with me, as always, is my co-host David.
What's up, guys?
Today, we are talking about Blade Runner, specifically the Final Cut version, because apparently there's about 80,000 versions of this movie.
Don't understand why.
I don't know why either, but we'll talk about them later on in the podcast. To get started, what did you give your general thoughts on this movie before we get into the synopsis?
Okay, so our good friend Anthony pointed out that the last movie sounded kind of, but that I sounded kind of hard against it, and that it wasn't necessarily the best overview, which I totally agree.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not a huge fan of this movie either. I've never seen it before. This is the first time watching it. I do find it a lot more enjoyable to watch than the previous movie, but it's a hell of a lot more interesting to research after the fact. So,
oh yeah, definitely.
I really do enjoy it looking back into the research, and I want to watch it again and see what I can pick up and notice a couple of times after. So we'll see how it goes, but so far I like it. Actually, I was surprised.
I think it helped, at least it helped me, that this was a more popular movie than Time After Time was, because I had to go and watch the commentary for the movie to figure out exactly what was going on for the movie. I mean, the movie itself was pretty self-explanatory, but exactly what to talk about for the movie, because there's not really any discussion about it online as far as I can tell. But this movie, there is hella discussion over it, like for real, all over the place. That being said, I think I enjoyed this movie a lot more than Time After Time. I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would, considering its reputation. But like David said, it was super fun to research. It's really fun to just look into the background of the movie and look at all the theories and stuff surrounding the movie. So yeah, we're going to just touch on, different production aspects and the many different versions of this movie. But first, we're going to go through the synopsis. So Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford, is forced by police boss Bryant, played by M. Emmett Walsh, to continue his old job as a replicant hunter. His assignment? Eliminate 4 escaped replicants from the colonies who have returned to Earth. Before starting the job, Deckard goes to the Tyrell Corporation and he meets Rachel, played by Sean Young, a replicant girl he falls in love with. So, as the synopsis said, Harrison Ford played the protagonist, Rick Deckard, yeah. But he's also been in a ton of other movies, like he was Han Solo in Star Wars, probably one of, if not his most famous role. Indiana Jones in all of the Indiana Jones movies, for better or for worse. Jack Ryan in Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, and President James Marshall in Air Force One. the antagonist, or the main antagonist of the movie, was Roy Batty, played by Rutger Hauer. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing his name. He's a Dutch actor, and he was in a few other movies besides this one. If you wanna get into that, David.
Yeah. To be honest, I didn't recognize any of these. But he was Lawrence Fassett in the spy thriller The Osterman Weekend, and I may have butchered that, but whatever. Totally going to butcher this one. Is it Antine of Navarre? Etienne of Navarre in the medieval fantasy of Lady Hawk, and then he was Andreas Kartak.
There you go.
And the God, can't read today, guys. In the Italian written/directed film The Legend of Holly Drinker. Holy Drinker. Oh God.
Oh my God.
The Legend of the Holy Drinker. You're gonna have to edit that out.
So I haven't seen any of these other movies either. I think Blade Runner is probably, at least pop culturally, the biggest movie that he was ever in.
Oh, definitely.
And then Ridley Scott directed the movie. He is a gigantic director. Directed Alien. He directed Gladiator. He directed Black Hawk Down, The Martian, and oddly enough, considering all of his other movies that he's directed, he also directed Thelma and Louise.
Which I never made the connection until today, and it's like, wow, that's actually one of my favorite movies. I did not know this. Amongst other things that he's done, he's had a lot of successes and a lot of flops. So we already mentioned Thelma and Louise. That actually earned him his first Academy Award for Best Director. Actually, a nomination for it. I don't think he won the award, but it was his first nomination for it. Mm-hmm. Immediately followed by 1492, Conquest of Paradise, which was basically a movie about Christopher Columbus, if you guys can't get the 1492 reference, which was funded independently and ended up being a complete disaster, financially and critically. And so much so that he didn't direct another movie for 4 years after that. So he goes off the high of Thelma and Louise and then immediately just has a huge flop. And then about 10 years after or so, he makes Gladiator, which is arguably one of his most famous critical and commercial successes. So,
among many other movies, but yes,
he's had a lot of ups and downs with that, hasn't he?
Oh yeah, for real. Before we get into sort of the production history, I want to get into the themes of the movie. There's a few big themes that it touches on. The first one that we're going to touch on is creation without responsibility. And just touching on the points that I wrote down here, Tyrell creates the rebellion, the replicants. Mankind fears them so much they ban them from Earth, and then Batty defies his creator's command to not return to Earth and returns to kill him. It's a theme that has a much broader application than the Batty-Tyrell confrontation, because if you look at the movie, Los Angeles is just like it's a retrofitted technological hellscape. Basically,
it is something else. I looked at that and was like, I'm glad they told me that this was Los Angeles, because I never would have guessed what city that was, because there's absolutely nothing that is recognizable at all.
Especially considering we spend like probably 50% of the movie just in the Chinatown portion.
Exactly.
Like, if I had to guess, if it didn't tell me that it was Los Angeles, I would have guessed this was like Hong Kong or something like that.
Or Tokyo or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We see massive overcrowding in the streets. We pretty much we don't ever see the sun in this movie, I don't think. It rains pretty much constantly, permanently cold and damp and miserable. Litter is everywhere, and it seems like the theme is creation without responsibility. They've created this technological future without taking any responsibility for the production of said technology, which clearly has affected the landscape and the populace of this city. Because, I mean, just look at the only nice place that we see is the police station. Everywhere else, just even Deckard's apartment is just trash.
Yeah,
just straight trash. Especially JF Sebastian's apartment. I was like, geez, how do you live here? I mean, literally, the place is almost falling down. It's got like holes in the roof and stuff, and water is just dripping constantly in the hallway that they're in. Mm-hmm. It's crazy. But yeah, I think creation without responsibility is probably the largest, maybe not the largest, but definitely one of the largest themes that the movie tries to touch on.
I would agree, because like you said, they have the creation of the replicants. They're creating a technology or whatever you want to call it without any responsibility whatsoever, to the point where they have to ban these things from Earth. There seems to be no responsibility as far as the Earth is concerned. Like they've just done everything they can without having any responsibility to help with pollution or anything. They have giant industrialized explosions of like gas and oil coming out of huge stacks in the sky. I mean, it's just it's weird. It's like I said earlier, it's a literal hellscape.
Yes. Like, no joke.
Exactly.
It is crazy. The next theme that we have is slavery and racism. If you want to go ahead and touch on that, David.
All right. So the biggest aspect of the racism would probably be just the outright fact that they have already banned the replicants from Earth. I guess they didn't. The human race just looked down on them so lowly. Like these are another life form or something, which they are technically, but they just, it's amazing. The artificial life that resembles the humans are so perfectly replicated that there's only one way to tell that they are not human, with the Voight-Kampf test, and I probably mispronounced that, but it's a really neat test that they do in the movie. It's got this little machine that looks into the, I guess the easiest way is the iris has an uncontrollable reaction, the way it dialects and stuff, to the simple questions that are supposed to probe some type of emotional response, and then that gives them away. But the whole thing is just completely looked down upon, and they're outlawed and they're hunted. They are literally killed and murdered, and it's not even called murder or anything. They're being retired. I mean, that just sounds like you're throwing out a piece of old furniture or something. I mean, that's just crazy how they did that. One of the big things that they did, that obviously shows that it was slavery that they were using as the theme here, would be Blade Runner. The whole theme, basically, Batty makes the point to himself as Deckard clings onto the life that the idea of slavery and racism in the 20th century Western culture, just the whole thing, he brings them up at the very end, and it's crazy that these things have been looked down upon this entire time, but he literally saves Deckard at the end from falling to his death. So that just proves that these aren't some machine that you should just willy-nilly kill, but they've done it anyways, and it's eye-opening if you actually watch it through that lens. And I didn't at first, but it's amazing.
It even says in the opening, like, crawl, that they were specifically used for slave labor, like for the hazardous exploration and colonization of other planets. So they would be sent out to colonize these other planets, and then I guess humans would be sent out afterwards, after everything has been settled down, you know?
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's hard. I didn't watch it through that lens either, but looking back on it, it's definitely hard not to see all of those things just like kind of perpetrated throughout the movie.
Exactly. After
Like,
you have a time. Yeah.
They call them what did Bryant say? I think he called after Deckard killed Leon. I think he said something about Deckard leaving a skin job on the side of the street. They're not even seen as close to human. They're just like machines wrapped up in flesh suits, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
At least to popular culture in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's crazy. The final theme that we have is free will and obedience. So, very early on in the movie, like before Deckard even goes out and finds any replicants that have any of the replicants that were fugitives. Excuse me. He goes to meet Edwin Tyrell. At least I think that's his name. Is it Edwin Tyrell?
I'm pretty sure it was.
Either way, he's the CEO of the Tyrell Corporation. He goes to see him because Bryant tells him that there's a Nexus 6 there that he wants Deckard to use the machine on, which is the VK machine, the little test that they do. He does it. He figures out that she's a replicant, but Tyrell also tells him that she doesn't know that she's a replicant, and that she's had memories implanted specifically from Tyrell's niece, so that she believes that she's human, so that her experiences have something to be based upon. So she already has kind of a view of the world when she's first like turned on, basically. She does eventually find out, and it's crazy how much it affects her. You know, I was watching the movie and I was like, I mean, it's doesn't seem like she should really have this strong of a response, but she's obviously been alive long enough to develop emotions, and even if she hadn't been, she's got these memories backed up. She thinks they're her own.
Yeah.
So maybe she, whether or not she knows it, or whether or not she consciously developed these emotions, she has them. So it's crazy. It's crazy.
He also had to make the very astute point at Deckard, that is, Tyrell had asked, how many questions does it usually take to determine that a subject is a replicant or not? And his answer was typically 20 to 30, but it took over 100 on Rachel. So it's done wonders to fool this test, or at least, well, maybe not fool it, because he did deduce that she was a replicant. So at least prolong the test and give even more credibility to these replicants, and makes them even more human. But it wasn't done to be kind or anything to him. He literally says it helps us control him better.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is, it's just sickening that that's the reason why they did it. She was an experimental research subject with that, and the fact that he used his own niece's memories, like, come on, how cold-hearted do you have to be to do that?
It's crazy. Yeah. The another thing in the movie that kind of touches on this theme is the fact that Deckard decides to run away with Rachel at the end of the movie, because as we find out, She's run away from Tyrell, obviously, which is why they end up together. But he is tasked with not only finding the rest of the fugitives at this point in the movie, but also finding and killing her, which he obviously doesn't want to do because he likes her, and he whether or not she is a human, he thinks he knows that she's human enough that it wouldn't be right just to kill her, you know?
Yeah.
So it kind of, he's breaking the mold in that he's going against what he was ordered to do.
Exactly. As a Blade Runner, he is supposed to go out and retire these replicants. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he sees enough in her that he just straight up, he doesn't even attempt to retire her. He just blatantly refuses to do so. Mm-hmm. It says a lot about his character too, and the fact that he can adapt and change and evolve given the right perspective on things. So hey, those memories did something.
Yeah, exactly.
Saved her.
Okay, so those are the major themes in this movie. The next thing that we wanted to touch on were the billions upon billions of versions of this movie that there seem to be. In reality, there are 7 versions of this movie, which is baffling to me because I don't understand why there needs to be so many. We'll get into the reasoning as to why there's so many versions here in a little bit.
This is George Lucas and Star Wars all
for real.
Again.
No joke. Except after Ridley Scott got it right with the final cut, he was done.
He was done.
Mm-hmm.
Which I'm okay with.
Ostensibly, the reason that there are so many versions was because at first Ridley Scott didn't have as much creative control as he probably should have in the first place. So the test screenings that they didn't go very well. The work print version was the one that was at the screening, and that's the reason why they made so many changes to the theatrical version. And when the theatrical version came out, critics were pretty divided on it. Some were unhappy with the film's pacing and the lack of action, and others praised its thematic complexity and visuals. So the studio made all these changes. It didn't end up doing any good. So the movie failed at the box office spectacularly. But anyway, we'll get into the 7 versions of the film. So like I said, the first version is the 1982 work print version that was shown to test audiences. It was also shown in 1990 and 1991 in Los Angeles and San Francisco as an original director's cut, although it didn't have the approval of Ridley Scott. This version contains differences from most other versions of the film. Chronologically, they are the opening replicant definition defining replicants as synthetic humans with paraphysical capabilities, having skin-flesh culture, which is not in the other 4 DVD versions. The opening title sequence and opening crawl explaining the backstory of the replicants is not present in this version. When Deckard plays the piano in a depressed stupor, there is no unicorn daydream sequence added or background music. The unicorn daydream was added to the director's cut and the final cut. There are different farther away shots of Batty as Deckard watches him die. There is also alternative narration in this version. It's the only narration in this version. I watched him die all night. It was a long, slow thing, and he fought it all the way. He never whimpered, and he never quit. He took all the time he had as though he loved life very much. Every second of it, even the pain. Then he was dead. There was no happy ending. The film ends when the elevator doors to Deckard's apartment close as he and Rachel leave, which is how the final cut version ends. And there are no closing credits. The words "the end" are shown, and that's the end of the movie.
Alrighty, so my first question on this would be the opening title sequence. and the crawl explaining the backstory of the backstory of the replicants not being present. Why would you not have that included? It seems like critical information.
Yeah, this is true. But it is the test screen version, so they may not have figured all that out yet, although I kind of doubt that that's the case.
And I could see that, and honestly, that one's not my biggest nitpick about this. The biggest nitpick would be the unicorn daydream scene not being included. That is such a huge tie-in to the ending of the movie. The ending of the movie would make no sense whatsoever if that scene's not in the movie.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a stupid unicorn on the floor, and he picks it up. Origami unicorn.
I even put in my notes. Where is it at? I put, when it got to this scene, I put Deckard in his own apartment is zoned out, dreaming of a white unicorn galloping through a forest. If there's any significance to this, I'm yet to see it. And then it finally pays off at the end of the movie with him picking up the origami unicorn, which we'll get into later on in the episode.
Yes, because it's very important.
Yes. So the next version is a San Diego sneak preview version that's nearly identical to the U.S. theatrical version, except it contains 2 scenes never seen before or since, including in the final cut version of the film, as well as the debut of the happy ending. The next version is the theatrical version that bombed so hard. It also included the happy ending as well as the addition of narration by Harrison Ford. Ford and Scott originally decided to film scenes that provided expositional information, but due to the poor test screenings, financiers rewrote and reinserted narration during post-production. It was suggested that Ford, not wanting the narration to be included in the film, performed it badly on purpose, but in a 2002 interview with Playboy, he said, "I delivered it to the best of my ability given that I had no input. I never thought they'd use it, but I didn't try and sandbag it. It was simply bad narration." The happy ending that we're referring to is the scene after Deckard and Rachel leave the apartment. Gaff, which is a policeman that Deckard is kind of bossed around by throughout the movie. He spares Rachel's life, and he allows her and Deckard to escape Los Angeles. There's a scene of the two driving away in a natural landscape, and Deckard explains that Rachel does not have the built-in 4-year life limitation that all of the other replicants have.
Crucial
next
information.
version, yes, which we don't get in the final cut version, but honestly, it's kind of, I don't know. I feel like it's kind of implied considering all of the other differences that she has to 99% of all the other replicants.
Yeah.
So, the next version is the 1982 international theatrical release, also known as the Criterion version or the unrated version. It includes 3 more violent action scenes than the U.S. theatrical release. It was initially unavailable in the U.S., but it was later released on VHS and Criterion Edition Laserdisc, and then later re-released in 1992 as a 10th anniversary edition.
Yeah, I'm sure it did good on Laserdisc, too.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Laserdisc was it was a format, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody lost their you-know-what on that one. We'll have to discuss that in another one.
Oh, yeah. And then there was the 1986 U.S. broadcast version, which was edited by CBS. It was edited to tone down the violence, profanity, and nudity, of which there's plenty of all of that throughout the movie. The teasers for this version made it clear that Deckard was not a replicant, and the opening crawl was also read by an anonymous narrator, and the source that I looked at made it clear that it was not Harrison Ford. And the actual text was different than the theatrical version in that it said, early in the 21st century, robots known as replicants were created as off-world slave labor. Identical to humans, replicants were superior in strength and agility, and at least equal in intelligence to the genetic engineers who created them. After a bloody mutiny, replicants were declared illegal on Earth. Special police squads, Blade Runner units, had orders to kill trespassing replicants. This was not called execution. It was called retirement.
There you go.
And then there was the 1992 director's cut, which was Ridley Scott approved. This was released due to the screening of the work print version in 1990 and 1991 that we talked about a little while ago. Scott didn't actually work on this one. He had some input, but he didn't really have like his hands on the editing computer, so to speak. He definitely didn't edit this with a computer in friggin' 1992, but he did provide notes and consultation to Warner Brothers, which was then given to film preservationist and restorer Michael Eric. He discovered a 70mm print of the film at the Todd A.O. Vaults, which was the production company for the movie. The reason that it was screened was because a couple other film collectors also found it in said vault. And then they worked with Warner Brothers to schedule other screenings. There were going to be 15, but Scott found out and he was like, this is not a director's cut. I don't really approve of this. So Warner Brothers was like, oh, okay, let's not do that. Let's quiet this down. And they cut all but 2, which were in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And then the final cut, literally the final cut, was in 2007. And this was the one where Scott had complete artistic control. So this version contains the original full-length version of the Unicorn Dream, as well as the additional violence and alternative edits for the international cut. So this is seen as the definitive version of the film, basically. I think there's like a Blu-ray set where you can watch pretty much every version that ever existed, even the US broadcast version, if you really wanted to do that. But I don't really see any reason to seek those out. I enjoyed watching the final cut version and knowing that, this was the way that Scott wanted it to be seen.
Exactly. I feel like the director's cuts are always the best versions of any film. It's how, as long as they actually had true artistic control, then that's how they intended it to be. It's not the BS of either financials cutting movie length or other things that can happen. This is how it was supposed to be made, and I feel like that's always the best way to do it, because Lord knows what happens with the rest of them.
Yeah, for real. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the ending, which is a whole discussion in and of itself, which is exactly why we've got it as its own section. And the very end scene of the movie, literally the last scene, where Deckard and Rachel are leaving his apartment. They're going to the elevator. Rachel goes into the elevator, but Deckard notices that she kind of steps over something. He reaches down, and it's an origami unicorn, which is significant because, one, the Unicorn Dream earlier in the movie, which Deckard had, and two, earlier in the movie we saw Gaff, which is again the police officer that Deckard was working with throughout the film. He made this origami something or other. I can't remember what it was when they were checking out what was that? Leon's apartment, I believe, and he kind of sets it down. It's not really something that you would necessarily take note of if you weren't paying attention or if you weren't watching this through again, but I remembered it specifically because of the unicorn at the end. So the ending brings up the question, is Deckard a replicant? Has he been this entire movie? And the reason that, that brings it up, because throughout the whole movie, Deckard doesn't tell anybody about the dream that he has with the unicorn. So how would Gaff have known about it if Deckard was not a replicant, and if Gaff hadn't read his memory file like Deckard did with Rachel earlier on in the movie at Tyrell's?
See, I don't know how you explain that any other way. And it's such a random thing, too. It was a unicorn. A random, totally out of the blue object. There's no way he's going to make an origami unicorn without knowing about that dream. And when I saw that, I got chills down my spine.
He could make an origami unicorn, right? But why would it be placed right outside of Deckard's apartment door?
Exactly.
Like, that's the biggest piece of evidence right there. Like, how do you explain that other than Deckard is a replicant? Maybe not a Nexus 6. Maybe he's a Nexus 7 or some other future generation of a Nexus. But he is most definitely a replicant.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say how you'd ever get anything else out of that. Anybody that doesn't see it that way is thinking the wrong things, or they're fundamentally challenged in the art of interpretation. And that might be harsh to say, but you can't see that and not put two and two together.
Exactly. If that were the only piece of evidence, I could see where people might have some issue with it. But there's a few other things,
others,
and there's three specifically that I picked down. At the when Deckard is on the roof after Batty has died, Gaff comes up and he's talking to him, and he says, "You've done a man's job, sir."
What is that supposed to be?
In what other context does that make sense?
Exactly.
And if you're going through the movie a second time, like I probably should do after this, just to watch the movie again. When Deckard is in his apartment with Rachel, let me back up a little bit. Throughout the movie, if their eyes are hit with a certain light, the replicant's eyes, like, they don't glow, but there's like this sort of like a red eye photo effect that goes on. Yep. And in the scene with Deckard and Rachel, there is a few shots where you can kind of see Deckard's eyes have that same sort of glint. And then there's also Deckard's amazing ability to heal. Like, he goes throughout the film, and he has cuts and bruises all over the place, but especially in the end fight with Roy Batty, where he gets his fingers dislocated, he's able to pop them back in, and not without pain, mind you, but he pops them back in, and then he just climbs a building. Like, especially if you'd been through everything else that you'd been through in the movie, but discounting that, if you had just had your fingers dislocated, you'd effectively, if you were a normal human anyway, you'd effectively only have use of like 3 fingers on your hand, because I think he broke he dislocated like 2 of them.
And I think he did the pinky and the ring.
So you don't effectively only have the grip of 3 fingers. How do you climb a building with that? You can't. I mean, I couldn't.
Yeah, that whole scene just made me cringe. That was cringeworthy right there. He grabbed that gun, knocked that gun out of his hand, grabbed those fingers, and did that. I was like, oh, no.
I was like,
no, sir.
Okay. Ugh. So, Ridley Scott confirmed. This is if you want to take the director's version of things, which I am more apt to believe, because ultimately he's the reason for the 7 different versions of this film, and he's the reason for the final cut version of this film. So whether or not it was the original intent, it is the intent that we're left with. But in a featurette for the final cut version of the film, Ridley Scott confirms it, saying, "How would anyone have known what was inside his head other than someone that knew what was in his file, that had been implanted in his brain? Can't be any clearer than that."
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
To the exact opposite of Harrison Ford, which had the complete disdain for the replicant theory and said flat out, no, he's a human.
Yeah.
So...
I'm honestly more apt to believe that he's a replicant, especially considering all of the other evidence in the movie.
I would agree so.
Yeah. Something that I think David was wondering about, does he have the 4-year lifespan? I would say, considering he's had a pass as a Blade Runner before, I would say probably not.
I could go with that. This is assuming that he is a replicant. And as far as mine and Ben's perspective we are saying yes, he is a replicant.
Mm-hmm.
So, did he have the 4-year lifespan? I guess we're going to both say in agreement, no. He does not. Should have he been retired, quote unquote? If the one cop wasn't going to do it, the one that obviously knew.
Yeah, exactly.
If Gaff is going to let him go, then does anybody else know?
Yeah, I would say that nobody's going to go after him after that.
I would say not. It doesn't seem to pose any danger, especially if he's going to be a replicant that's a Blade Runner and destroy the other ones anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of a problem taking care of itself, so who cares, right? Let the animals eat the animals.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be the motivation and the theory of future corporations, would it not?
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty
much.
So, if he's a replicant, though, who's and this is my biggest question out of all this: whose memories does he have?
I don't know. It seems as though they have to take them from somebody because Tyrell gives Rachel his niece's memories.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Maybe he got his memories from another police officer, another Blade Runner, maybe a past Blade Runner. Maybe he's a replacement for a Blade Runner that got killed or something.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Do they have to be dead, or can these memories be used from a living source?
I would assume that you don't have to be dead. If they figured out a way to create these new life forms, then they should be able to figure out a way to extract memories from people without them being dead.
I could see that.
Yeah, that's what I think anyway. Makes sense to me.
If he wasn't a replicant, do you think he still would have fallen in love with Rachel? You think that was a sunk deal?
I think if he was still the exact same person, but he just wasn't a replicant, I feel like his past still would have been the same. Because then his personality and his feelings would still be, exactly the same.
Exactly. Because I don't think he knows, or if he did know, Or if he didn't know, I think that little nod at the end kind of made me wonder, did he know? Did he acknowledge that, okay, yeah, somebody knows? Well, Gaff knows. He knows who knows, obviously, because it's the origami unicorn. I mean, who else would have done the origami? So, I could see that being the case. So why is Rachel here at all, though? If they're supposed to be banned?
I mean, it seems like she was more of an experiment than anything. So I feel like I think the ban is on the Nexus 6 units coming to Earth on their own terms.
Okay.
So as long as they're like being held somewhere, like at that, because obviously they're not concerned about her until she leaves the Tyrell Corporation, which is when he's tasked to go after her. So as long as they're following orders and being obedient and everything, then they're okay. But the minute that they cross that line, the minute that they go fugitive, that they go rogue,
okay,
all bets are off.
Okay. Because it didn't seem, and it could have been because I missed it, and it may take a few screenings. It didn't seem like it was very, very clearly explained as to what had happened, why they're banned. Are they banned because of something that they did, or is it just an outright overall ban on everything? Did Tyrell not care, and he created her anyways? Or was she an experimental research project that was approved? Didn't really lead much evidence to any of those questions. So it was something I thought we'd discuss on that.
Yeah, I think she was more created as an experiment because of the memory implantation thing. Even though clearly it was done before with Deckard, you know, I think they were still like experimenting with it, just seeing where it would go.
Gotcha. So, I think that covers everything except one last question.
Okay.
If she apparently isn't going to be the first model. If she was the first one, then our Deckard theory falls apart. But assuming it's just them two, and replicants don't have memories, then why would they be escaping towards Earth? How would they know? Could you just not withhold that type of information from them if they had no memories?
I mean, potentially, but then you would run into... I mean, clearly they're feeding these units information beforehand. Whether or not it's memories is a different story, but they're feeding them information beforehand so that they have something to base all of their experiences on, right?
Makes sense.
So how would you go about scrubbing all instances from Earth from every bit of knowledge that humans have made? Considering that we live here on Earth, and most of what we know has to do with Earth, not necessarily with ourselves, then how would we scrub all of that information to make it make sense without that context?
That's a fair point. That's a very fair point. But I still feel like if they had all the know-how and the knowledge of creating these things and having them... Did he even explain exactly where they were? I mean, they were slaves working on other worlds, but did it specifically mention where?
No, it just said off-world.
Gotcha. I don't know. I feel like that they could have just explained everything about those circumstances just using context on the world that they're on, but
yeah, maybe
not. Who knows?
I don't know. I'm more apt to believe what I said before, but you could very well be right, and we'll never know unless we watch the sequel, which they may not address it in, but we'll probably have to watch the sequel eventually anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's where we're going to leave this episode, unless you have anything else you want to talk about it.
No, I liked it. I liked it a lot more than I thought it was. I still wasn't into it at the beginning of the movie, but going back through this research was like, oh, okay, this deserves a second and a third and maybe even a fourth look, just to catch all the nitty-gritty details. I'm surprised. Now I see why it's huge in pop culture.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've always heard about it. I've never watched it. And looking at it, it's kind of dark and gloomy, and I can kind of see why. I mean, it's like, oh, this isn't.
I've had the movie for, I don't know, probably a couple of years now. I think I bought it at Walmart or something. I've just never watched it until we said to watch it for this podcast. So, yeah, I'm with you. It's definitely a harder movie to get into at the beginning, but going back and looking at all of the behind the scenes stuff and the research and the theories and the themes and everything that goes into this movie, it's hard to say that I won't go back and watch it again. Maybe not right away, but definitely like soon. Yeah. Because I want to catch everything that I talked about. Like with the ending theory and all of the themes and stuff, and yeah, the research definitely made this movie a lot more interesting and a lot more digestible, I think.
Yeah.
So with that said, before we go, out of 5 replicants, what would you give this movie?
I was so hoping you was going to say replicants. I was actually going to ask that same question to you just to make sure we use that reference, but good on you. Once again, our minds are totally in sync. Let's see. I gave Time After Time, I think, a 3.2 tops. Golden shiny crystals, or however we rephrase that one. I'd have to give this
time crystals or something.
I'd have to give this a 3.7, maybe a 4 out of 5 replicants. It's definitely better, and I liked it a lot. Going back and looking at it some more in the future, it very well may go up from there too.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to. I was a little bit higher than you on Time After Time. I think I was at like a 3.5. I think for this one I'm gonna have to go for a 4.5. I liked it. I liked it a lot. It's not like perfect 5 out of 5, 100% status, but I think a 90% is good enough. It's definitely hitting all the right buttons for sci-fi movies for me.
Yeah, I give it a good 70-ish%, maybe 80 tops. So yeah. I'm good with that.
Okay,
I could see that.
All right, well, that is where we're going to leave this episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave a rating on whatever podcasting platform you listen on, because that helps us a lot. And if you think if you think you know somebody that would like the show, be sure to share it. But until next time, we'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast from Planet X. We are hosted, edited, and produced by Ben Mason and co-hosted by David Knowles. Our theme song is produced by the Tormented Teamster. You can follow Ben on Twitter at BenPlaysVidyaS. That's Ben Plays VIDYAS. And you can follow David on Twitter at Car6x16. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can contact the show on Twitter at PlanetXPod or by email at podcastfromplanetx@gmail.com. That's all for this episode. We'll see you next time.